by spies here in Washington running out of the Chinese embassy, or non-traditional espionage of the sorts we've been discussing, of sons of PLA researchers who are at advanced research institutions just happening to sign up for the right programs and then spiriting away the information when they can. In Arkansas, we had a university professor at University of Arkansas who was convicted of crimes related to having Chinese patents, just like the head of the Harvard biochemistry department. Just there was a conviction and sentencing just yesterday in one of these cases. So the threat is not going to go away. It's still there, and I think there's some enterprising and patriotic line attorneys in the U.S. attorney's offices across the country and FBI agents in the field offices across the country who are still pursuing this. But I worry that they don't have the kind of robust support they have from the main justice here in Washington.
In talking about whether they're foreign students, foreign workers, whatever it is from China, I think people they're assuming that those people are in a similar situation to someone coming from, say, India or Japan or England, when in fact their family members at home, in a sense, are kind of hostages. So that even if somebody comes here as a student from China or a foreign worker or what have you, even if they really don't like the CCP very much or aren't really connected to the PLA, they don't really have any choice if those institutions want to apply pressure to them. Isn't that one of the real dangers here?
Yeah, it's a severe danger. And as you say, especially if you're from a friendly nation, a democratic nation like the United Kingdom or Italy or Japan or Brazil, you're not going to face that kind of coercion that threats could happen to your family back home. In China, that is a tool of statecraft, and I think it's important. We've made the distinction here a few times between Chinese Americans, Chinese nationals who've naturalized here, had parents or grandparents or great-grandparents going back decades who've naturalized here and are fellow citizens, and Chinese nationals, subjects of the People's Republic of China who are here on some kind of immigration status. We make that distinction. It's important to understand that Xi Jinping and Chinese communists don't make that distinction. So this is a risk even for Chinese Americans, even for those people who have immigrated here and become citizens. As long as they have family back in mainland China, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party views those American citizens as theirs.
Interesting.
And that risk is even doubly true when you're talking about Chinese nationals who are here on some kind of immigration status. That's why you see on university campuses, in many cases, the Confucius Institutes or whatever they're calling themselves now become, in effect, enforcers for the Chinese Communist Party. They're collecting on fellow Chinese nationals, or in many cases, Chinese Americans who still have families back in mainland China, if they're protesting, for instance, about Tibet, or protesting about the Uyghur people who are subject to genocide in northwest China, if they're protesting about Hong Kong. It's a pervasive threat. That's just probably the most public aspect of it. But it's also true, again, if you yourself, as a young Chinese national, would simply like to get a world-class education at one of our great institutions and don't really want to spy for the Communist Party, that you're subject to a lot of pressure and coercion because your family is still back in the mainland.
Right, right. There's another immigration issue that China figures into. It's not really so much a security issue, but it is important, and this is the recalcitrant countries. It's kind of the shorthand term for it. Because a lot of countries don't want to take back their own citizens if they've committed a crime and are deportable. And in a sense, you could sort of understand it. It's sort of a hot potato. It's like, well, these people are your problem now. China's one of the worst offenders in this regard. And what is it? I mean, what can we do more to actually apply pressure?
Yeah, so an insane Supreme Court decision a couple decades ago says that if we have an illegal alien in our country, they've been ruled deportable under our laws, but their home country won't take them back, then we're just stuck with them. And after about 6 months, we have to release them into the country, even though the law has already adjudicated them as not lawfully present. This is oftentimes a bigger problem under Democratic administration. Sometimes it gets better under Republican administration, as it did under the last one. The Trump administration was pretty good about using diplomacy and where necessary pressure to force countries like, say, Sierra Leone to take back more of its foreign nationals. China obviously is a different case. They've got a lot more leverage than smaller countries. But the Trump administration was successful somewhat there too, but the Biden administration has, again, totally abandoned that, I think, through a combination of opposition to anything Trump did and undertones of racism and nativism and xenophobia and just kowtowing to Chinese communists. There are things we can do to put pressure on them. I'd suggest that most of what we should do is probably targeted towards Chinese Communist Party officials. And
like
the
denying
system.
visas to their families, that sort of thing?
Yeah, denying visas to their families, denying student visas to their families. A lot of them use the so-called reporter visa to send in what are basically their propagandists. I mean, this is a specific problem, so I wouldn't have a shotgun blast approach to it. I'd have a targeted, specific approach to it, which I think we can use the leverage we have in our immigration system to say, if you want to get any of these visas that are not dangerous to our national interests, then you're going to take back the Chinese nationals that are in this country that we have found removable.
Interesting. You mentioned this I visa. This is supposed to be for reporters, right? Like, in other words, somebody from Reuters or the BBC or whatever who's stationed here would have something like this. How are the Chinese using that? Because Chinese media is obviously not like the BBC. Well, actually, maybe it is more like the BBC than you'd like. But it's not there. It's not a free media. It's a government. It's an organ of the government.
So if you think about it, if a reporter inherently doesn't need a long-term or recurring visa. I'm sure the Chinese communists are granting our reporters free and open access to Wuhan to research what happened there.
And the Uyghur camps
3 years
too.
ago, or the Uyghur camps as well. But typically you're coming in, or you like going to report on the Olympics, or
Right.
coming here to report, like if Xi Jinping were to come for a summit in 2 years, coming here to report on something like that. So they're supposed to be more, they're short term, they're more targeted. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to use these, though, to get reporters, which are really state-owned propaganda outfits, into America to influence the tone of coverage. Sometimes they're using, rather than using those visas because they are shorter term and more focused, they're trying to evade them by, say, getting H-1B visas for what are really, in effect, propagandists, by calling them social media specialists, or something.
Job Americans won't do. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if you dealt with this in your book, Only the Strong, but there is sort of a broader issue, and you've alluded to a number of times, that I don't think we are envisioning dealing with the People's Republic of China in a different way than we deal with other countries. It was, in a sense, it was a lot clearer when we were dealing with the Soviet Union. Everybody sort of got that there was a threat from the Soviet Union. There seems to be.
Let's not.
Okay. Well, some
look at the
people
pass through rose-colored glasses.
Okay,
a lot of Democrats like Joe Biden and John Kerry didn't quite get it.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But I mean, I think it was. Let's say it was more broadly understood that the Soviet Union, of what kind of threat it was. There seems to not be that same, or only maybe now people are getting that China's different. That whether it's reporters, whether it's foreign students, whatever it is, it's not the same as bringing people from other countries.
Yeah. So during the Cold War with Soviet Russia, it is true that normal Americans of pretty much all stripes understood that Soviet Russia was our enemy and that they were a genuine threat. I don't think you have that same whatever Joe Biden and John Kerry and Mike Dukakis and all the rest thought. But just normal Americans across the country understood that Soviet Russia was a genuine threat and the chief threat we faced. I don't think you have that same widespread perception about China, even though China is deeply unpopular. They were deeply unpopular with the American people before the coronavirus pandemic as well. There's lots of opinion polling that suggests that. I don't think that as many Americans view them as an enemy, though, and that's in large part, again, because our political class for 30 years kind of worked together to cast them as a partner, that China's peaceful rise was going to somehow be beneficial for American workers and American communities and families, and that's simply not been the case. It shouldn't have been perceived that way at the time. There were plenty of people who opposed, for instance, the annual certification of most favored nation status for China. Bill Clinton used this as a campaign issue in 1992. There were some people who opposed strongly the granting of permanent most favored nation status and accepting China's entry into the World Trade Organization, which really set off in 2000, 2001, the so-called China shock that accelerated the outsourcing of wholesale industries to China. But again, this was celebrated and defended, promoted by our political class. Even though it was widely known, I mean, it's not, we have translators, you don't have to speak Mandarin. I mean, people knew that Deng Xiaoping used to talk about biding your strength and hiding your strength and biding your time. Like, when communist nation says we're going to hide our strength and bide our time, you might want to take note of that and not do anything to give them more strength, which is what we did. We basically fueled the rise of China. And now it's a threat unlike, I'd say, anything our nation has ever faced. Much different, and in my opinion, more dangerous than the Soviet-Russian threat, because Soviet Russia was not so deeply entangled with America's economy. We had largely two separate trading blocs in the world. There was some trade between our nations, but very, very little. And
economically, they were much more anemic and weak.
Economically, they were always much smaller than America, and or when you look at the free world and the Warsaw Pact bloc in the Cold War combined, the economies just nothing like each other. Whereas China's economy is now almost the size of our own economy. And again, the influence we see here in America is pervasive across the world as well. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, just traveled to China with kind of their equivalent of the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, and basically kowtowed to Xi Jinping, repeating the exact same mistakes with Xi and China that his predecessors committed with Vladimir Putin and Russia, making Germany ever more dependent and entangled on access to the Chinese market and imports from China that companies have opened up there. So we've never quite faced a competitor that has an economy that can rival ours, therefore that can fund a military that can rival ours, and that is so deeply entwined in our own economy. That's why I've called for some time, I issued a report on this in the last Congress, for what I call strategic decoupling. We need to look at the areas where we're most vulnerable to China and start to unravel those vulnerabilities. Sometimes it's going to be cutting edge things like China's cornering of the market and what's known as rare earth elements. Now, the irony is they're not that rare at all. You could probably go dig some up on the National Mall if you wanted to. What is rare is the mining and the manufacturing, the processing of them, which we've outsourced almost entirely to China. But sometimes it's very low-tech, commonplace things like the ingredients for basic pharmaceuticals, things like heparin or acetaminophen, ibuprofen, penicillin. We just don't really make that in America anymore. It can be made in advanced countries. I mean, about a third of what we use here in America is from places like Japan and Austria and Italy. So it can be done in a cost-effective way, and preferably it'd be done here, but at least it shouldn't be done in China, our main rival. We need to unravel all of these dependencies. If you buy your kids plastic toys for Christmas, or you get your fake Christmas tree from China, that's probably not going to put us at great risk in America. But if you're getting life-saving medicines or medical equipment, or the kind of inputs like those rare earth elements that are essential for every modern electronic device, that's a grave exposure that we never had with Soviet Russia.
So I know we only have a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask you about immigration maybe a little more broadly. What are you looking forward to seeing both in the lame duck session and then in the new Congress? What are you planning on doing? What do you think we're going to be seeing?
We're not looking for what Chuck Schumer and all those Democrats were talking about yesterday, which is some kind of mass amnesty.
What's going to stop them, though? That's the issue.
I don't think they're going to be able to. They won't get 60 votes for that in the Senate.
Okay.
And I don't think they'd get 60 votes even if they put something more targeted into any kind of year-end spending bill. Obviously, in the new Congress, we'll have a Republican majority that I hope will be able to block the worst proposals that we were trying to fend off over the last 2 years when Democrats controlled both chambers. Unfortunately, some Republicans, I think, have softer views on immigration than I think our party should have. One thing, though, that we haven't really discussed at length today, which is on the minds, foremost on the minds of most Americans, is the fiasco at our southern border. And I think even though that's a separate issue from legal immigration or non-immigrant visas, the security of our southern border is kind of a threshold issue, and that if the Biden administration doesn't take more steps to get the border under control, it'll be hard to find any kind of consensus immigration approach that can earned my support or probably the support of most Republicans.
Do you get the sense from any of your Democratic colleagues that even if, say, especially with the end of Title 42, that they're kind of looking into the abyss there? I mean, this administration has used Title 42 as the only limited immigration control measure that's there, and that's going to turn into a pumpkin in next month.
Yeah.
Is there no one on the Democratic side who realizes that maybe this is at least a political problem, if not a
I think so.
policy
Well,
one?
I think, you saw a few throwaway votes, that were then highlighted in campaign ads by Democratic senators up for re-election. So they recognize this as a political problem for
Right.
them. Now, they may think that because they had a better than expected election result, that, they dodged a bullet and it's not that big an issue. I don't think that's the case, especially, if you're a Democrat up in a state like Arizona or New Mexico, who's directly impacted by the fiasco at our southern border. You probably shouldn't think that. But really, I mean, when more than 100,000 Americans are dying each year from drug deaths, and that increase over the last 10 years is almost entirely attributable to synthetic opioids coming from Mexico. I mean, every state's a border state.
Right.
Whether it's West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Montana, just to name a few places where you have Democratic senators up for re-election. So I hope my Democratic colleagues take it more seriously, but I so far have not seen much evidence of that.
We only got a minute or two left. I wanted to give you a chance to sort of talk a little bit about your new book, just the title, and as they say, when you talk about a book, you want to repeat the title over and over again. So it's called Only the Strong?
Yeah.
And what's the punchline?
Only the Strong is the punchline, you'd say, is probably the subtitle, Reversing the Left's Plot to Sabotage American Power, because the sense of decline that so many Americans have today is both genuine and real, but it's also not an accident. It's not bad luck. It didn't just happen because Joe Biden or Barack Obama are president. They want American power to decline. They want America to retrench and pull in its horns and become a more normal nation. This is going back 100 years to the progressive era with Woodrow Wilson, the patron saint of the progressives, who openly rebuked and repudiated the Declaration and the Constitution and the moral foundations of America. Once you do that, it's not a very long step to get to where you were in the 60s and 70s with the Blame America First Democrats, as the great Gene Kirkpatrick called them. I'm not saying that they're un-American. Well, I'm not saying they're necessarily un-American, although a lot of them are. I'm saying that they think that America is more likely to be a source of war and arrogance and oppression in the world than safety and freedom and prosperity. And therefore, they undermine the wellspring and the foundation of American power. That's true of our military. That's true of American energy production. It's true of our immigration system.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is how does the immigration figure into that?
So, I mean, a nation without borders is not a nation. I mean, it's the most fundamental thing. Like, you look at a map, any 5-year-old can look at a map and see what makes a country, at least at the most elemental level. And the Biden administration has basically erased that border that we have with Mexico, and look at the consequences of it, from rising crime and drug deaths, and to say nothing of all the issues we've been discussing on how an adversary like China can exploit our legal immigration system. And then in the second part of the book, I lay out kind of a roadmap to rebuild our power. We've been in dire straits before. Look, it only took one election in 1980 to help turn things around, even after a disappointing midterm election in 1978. So it's kind of a history of how we got to where we are, how the Democratic left has been intentionally and purposely sabotaging American power, and how we can rebuild it.
Well, good. I know you have to run. You've got another appointment. I really appreciate it. Senator Tom Cotton. The book is Only the Strong. I assume it's on Amazon. And you announced you've not thrown your hat in the ring for 2024. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And I'm pretty sure Republican primary voters can find another nominee, and probably a good one. But I know my boys won't be able to find another dad to teach them how to hit a fastball and read a book over the next 2 years.
Okay, well, you focus on that. I appreciate your coming in. I just want to do a plug. This whole program is going to be on our website at cis.org. We have a website. We have a podcast, Parsing Immigration Policy. Maybe actually we'll see if you'd be as willing senator come on at some point, maybe next year. You're going to be reintroducing the RAISE Act. Is that
I am
correct?
with Senator-elect Katie Britt as a new co-sponsor.
Oh, okay, good. She's a new incoming senator from
Alabama.
Is that correct? Very good. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for everybody for coming, and we'll look forward to what you're going to be doing in the next Congress, Senator.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, CIS. Yeah.